Hello, and welcome back to my series on building a square drop trailer. In the last episode, we were able to get the trailer pretty much weather tight. We got the doors, windows, roof vent, solar panels, and all the exterior trim installed. And in this video, I plan on filling the empty space in front of the trailer with a tongue box. To help design the tongue box, I took a photo, put it in Microsoft Paint, and then kind of sketched in the rough shape of what I'd like. And here's the file that I made on my computer to give you an idea what I'm talking about. I used the same steel I used for the body of the trailer. It's 3/4 inch tubing. And I started out by cutting the two-dimensional shape of the side view of the tongue box, and then I repeated it for the other side of the tongue box. The materials for the tongue box will be the same as the body of the trailer, but not only that, the construction technique will be the exact same as well. I'm going to start by framing out the tongue box. I'm going to put some paneling on the inside, some paneling on the outside, and then finish with some doors and trim. If you want to see the technique and how I built the body of the trailer, check out video number 7 in this build series. To ensure the left and right side of the tongue box are identical, I first built out one of the sides, and then I used that as a template to build the other one. I laid it on the table, and then I clamped each piece of the tubing on top of it, and then welded it in place. After finished welding both sides, I brought them back out to the trailer and set them on the frame. I wanted to make sure that the angles were a proper fit before measuring and cutting the cross beams. To ensure the cross beams are all the same length, I cut multiple beams at the same time with the saw. Then I carried the beams over and started assembling the frame of the tongue box. And then I repeated the same process of carrying it over and setting it in place. Wanted to make sure everything still fit and nothing got warped before moving on and framing around the doors on each side. And speaking of doors, I purchased these from a company online called RecPro. They're a 24-inch by 24-inch door that opens upright. I plan on using a 12-volt fridge that should slide out from one of these doors. So if I did the math right, it should fit. To frame in the doors, I started with the vertical studs on each side of the door. And then I cut and welded in the horizontal tubing above and below the door. In order of the fridge to slide out of the door, the floor of the tongue box will need to be raised up by about 2 inches. And for that, I bought some 1x2 inch steel tubing. And then I pre-drilled and tapped the holes to allow a 1/4 inch by 20 bolt to go through the fridge slide and into the steel tubing. I took 3 of these to make sure that the mounting locations for the fridge slide were all located in the proper spots. And speaking of the fridge slide, the brand is called All-Top, and I was lucky enough to find one secondhand on Facebook Marketplace. It's about 21 inches wide and 31 inches deep. It has a total of 6 mounting locations, 3 on each side, and here I'm screwing in those 1/4 inch by 20 bolts. I'm also test fitting the slide within the door to make sure that there's no interference before welding everything together. After tacking in place, I double check to make sure that the slide still works, and then I remove the fridge slide and the door from the tongue box, and then finish welded those 3 floor risers. Then I moved on to the vertical studs of the tongue box. And these are welded on to give it a little bit extra structural support, along with giving a little bit extra area for the interior panels and the exterior siding to attach to. After welding those together, I moved on to the problem and the solution of how to mount it to the trailer. The rear of the tongue box will have 3/4 inch by 20 bolts that mount it to the frame. The center bolt will be mounted right into the center spine of the trailer frame. And the other 2 bolts will go through the tongue box and into the drilled and tapped holes in this angle iron that'll soon be welding to the frame of the trailer. The front of the tongue box will also use 3 1/4" by 20 bolts, and these tapped holes are drilled right into the 1x2 steel tubing that's getting welded in the trailer frame right now. After the mounting locations for the floor of the tongue box were figured out, I lifted the tongue box and set it in place, and then I could work on the problem of mounting the rear of the tongue box to the body of the trailer. For this, I even using the same 1/4" by 20 bolts, except for I drilled and tapped them into the studs on the front of the trailer. And those bolts will go through this little piece of angle iron that I welded onto the top bar within the tongue box. In case you're keeping track, that's a total of 8 bolts that'll make this tongue box completely removable in case I ever want to change it out in the future. After doing a lot of research on these tongue boxes, I noticed that most people use them for battery storage or electrical cabinets. But if you watched my previous videos, you'll know that the electrical is built within the cabin of my trailer and all the batteries are stored underneath. So that leaves my tongue box wide open. The main purpose for mine will be for the refrigerator, but I'd also like a little extra space for some storage, maybe some camp chairs and things like that. That means that this tongue box doesn't have to be waterproof, it can just be water resistant. If water does get inside of it, there'll be drainage paths so it can drip out, and I'm still making sure that all the materials used are rot proof and rust proof. And here I just finished with the painting process to help with the rust proofing. And now I can start working on the interior of this box. And for the paneling, I'm just using the leftover sheets of the ACM panels that I used for the siding of the rest of the trailer. This first interior panel of the box actually gets mounted to the exterior of the box. It's the flooring. Remember, it doesn't have to be watertight, but putting the flooring on the bottom of this box will give it a nice flat surface so it can mount securely to the frame of the trailer. It gets mounted the same way the rest of the panels so far have been mounted, using VHB tape to secure it, and then using a trim router to get a nice flush cut around the outside. The next piece is the interior front of the box. This piece has a bunch of weird cutouts. Those cutouts kind of wrap around the risers that are on the floor. And I also had to warp it a little bit to get it into place. And then I flipped it over and put the VHB tape on the ceiling. And then I installed the ceiling panel the same way the rest of the panels are done before measuring the last piece. And just like the rest of the interior panels, I had to temporarily flex it to get it in place. It only took a couple sheets, but the interior panels are now done. I flipped it over and set it on some sawhorses and made room for the next project. To help protect the fridge from the summer heat, I wanted to insulate this box, and for that I'm just using the leftover sheets of 3/4" foam that I used on the body of the trailer. And although not shown in this video, I did use a spray adhesive to permanently mount the foam to the interior panels of this box. Now that it's insulated, I can move on to the side panels of the tongue box. And for those, I'm just using the ACM panels. Right now I'm cutting out the holes for where the doors go. It gets mounted the same way using the VHB tape, and then I use the trim router to make sure a nice flush edge, and then I repeated the same process on the other side of the tongue box. With the siding on the front and top of the tongue box, I wanted to switch it up. Instead of using the same ACM panels, I wanted something that matched the fenders a little bit better. So I went out and bought a sheet of aluminum that had the same finish as the fenders. Not only do I think it looks better, it also eliminates the need for the extra trim that goes on the 135-degree angles. But the real reason is that in part 6 of this build series, I built a metal brake, and I've been itching to use it ever since. I only bought one sheet of this aluminum, so before bending it, I made sure everything was lined up perfect before making the first bend. After grunting several times, I used a speed square to make sure that it was at 135 degrees. Then I spun the sheet around, got everything lined up, and then slowed down the audio so my grunts sound more masculine. I left the sheet a little long, just in case I messed up the first bend. What I did is I carried it back over the bench and trimmed off the extra aluminum. After cleaning the surfaces on both the aluminum and the tongue box, I applied the VHB tape, and then I removed the protective film. It's made installing the aluminum sheet a little bit tricky, There's a little bit of forgiveness with the VHB tape, so when I first carried the sheet over and stuck it to it was slightly off, but I was able to peel it off and then put it back into place where it needs to be. I used the router with the flush trim bit again, but this time I used some yellow tape on the outside, just in case the little shard of aluminum got stuck underneath the router, it wouldn't scratch the rest of the aluminum. After that, it was just a matter of peeling off the protective film over the ACM panels. Next thing I did was install the RV roof trim. If you watched the previous video, I went a little more in depth on how to install it. To make a long story short, the first piece I used a tape measure, and the rest of it I pretty much just kind of eyeballed it. Trimming a little bit off each time until it fits perfect. Once I was happy with the location of all the trim, I pre-drilled and installed all the screws, only just to remove all the screws, take the trim back off, install the butyl tape, and then put the trim back on with a weather-tight seal. And when I was finished on the driver's side, I repeated the same process on the passenger side. And then I moved on to installing the vinyl strip. Not only is this vinyl decorative in nature, it also helps protect the screws and the screw holes from water intrusion. It goes on pretty easy, it's just a matter of squeezing it into the channels, and then if you have to make a real sharp angle, you can use a heat gun to bend it a little bit easier. Next was a pretty big moment. Having a concept on paper is one thing, but actually seeing what the finished product or almost finished product looks like in real life is a completely different thing. My wife helped carry it over, we set it in place, and then we celebrated with a high five. To mount it, it's just a matter of taking those 2 1/4" by 20 bolts and putting them into the body of the trailer, and taking the other 6 1/4" by 20 bolts and putting them into the frame of the trailer. Now moving on to the interior. I'm going to start by drilling a hole for the wiring. In the 8th video of this build series, I ran a large wire from the electrical cabinet all the way up to the front where the tongue box is, and now I'm running that wire through a waterproof gland and into a 12-volt sub panel. This sub panel is where the fridge will get wired into and any other accessory that's on the front of the trailer. Speaking of fridge, I can now get the fridge slide installed using those 6 1/4" by 20 bolts, and we'll be able to see if everything still fits after all this hard work. So far so good. I chose this fridge mainly because of my budget. In the future I might upgrade to something a little more efficient or something a little bit bigger. But for now, this one seems to work, and it fits. After wiring and strapping down the fridge, I can now move on to installing the doors. If you watched the 11th video in this build series, you'll know that the rear hatch is installed very similar to these side doors. It starts off by running a layer of butyl tape around the flange, and then I carry the door over the trailer, kind of squish it into place, I hold it in with some clamps, and then the screws get installed through the aluminum frame and into the steel frame of the trailer. And then the same process is repeated on the driver's side of the trailer. Right now it looks like the tongue box is just about finished, but it's not. I'd like to get some accessories added onto it right away, that way I don't have to worry about it in the future. The first will be a way to cool or heat the camper. In the future I'll probably buy a little air conditioning unit, but for right now I'm going to worry about the heat. Ductwork from the heater or the AC unit will have to go through the tongue box and into the cab of the trailer. So I started off by cutting a hole, and it was a messy process.
What a mess!
And then I glued and screwed a bayonet RV sewer flange onto the front of the cab of the trailer. And on the inside of the trailer, I used a little rotating vent that comes with most Chinese diesel heaters. And to power the diesel heater, I had to drill a hole through the front of the tongue box. And then I installed a quick connect port that runs to the 12-volt sub panel underneath the fridge. To get the ductwork into the cab of the trailer, I first have to drill a hole through the front of the tongue box. I used some masking tape, and I taped on a scrap piece of ACM panel onto the front of the tongue box, just in case the circular saw got away from me. I didn't want to scratch anything. And then I trimmed out the hole using a 5-inch Kayak Port window. And here you can see the path of the ductwork from either the air conditioner or the diesel heater. It goes through the tongue box and into the cab of the trailer. The last accessory is more of a modification to help the efficiency of the refrigerator. These refrigerators work by taking the heat out of the inside of the fridge and pumping it to the outside of the fridge. And it comes through this vented hole right here. The goal is to get the heat out of the tongue box. In order to do that, I plan on putting a powered vent on the top of the tongue box and a passive vent underneath in about the same location that the fridge needs fresh air. With a passive vent underneath the trailer, I'm using an RV sidewall vent, and the installation starts with drilling a hole. And since it isn't going through an insulated sidewall, I had to cut down this piece of the vent, which I'm also calling the floor drain now. And the second half of this vent is designed so water can't splash up into it, and it's being attached with 3 bolts and VHB tape. Now that the passive vent is done, I can work on the powered vent that'll be on top of the tongue box. And for that, I'm using this battery-operated fan that's automatically recharged with the built-in solar panel. To install it, I first have to determine a location and then drill a hole. The fan came in a polished stainless steel, and I wanted more of a brushed metal look to match the tongue box and the fenders, so I took a Scotch-Brite pad and I kind of roughed it up a little bit. Then I cleaned the mating surfaces, put on 2 different layers of butyl tape, and then I installed the fan on the tongue box by tightening down the 3 bolts. Afterwards, I was able to remove the extra butyl tape and remove the protective film. The only thing left to do is to test out the fan. And a working fan is a great way to end this video. Thanks for sticking with me so far as I build this camper. Not only am I enjoying learning how to build a square drop trailer, I'm also enjoying learning how to build a YouTube channel. So I'd like to say thank you to all the subscribers. And stay tuned for the next video as we work on a custom roof rack.